Hey everyone, welcome to episode 68 of Nutanix Weekly from XenTegra. I am your host for the day, Phil Sellers. I'm a solutions architect here at XenTegra, and I'm very happy to have two great resources from Nutanix with me. You guys know these guys pretty well by now, Jirah Cox and Ben Rogers. Thanks for joining, guys.
Thanks for having us, Phil.
So it's been a minute. I think we were on site at Nutanix.next for the last episode that we taped. I unfortunately got a little under the weather and missed out on the event. So missed out of a lot of fun and a lot of great news from the week.
How did we sound? I'm going to confess how busy I've been. I haven't gone back and listened to it. We kind of YOLO'd it and hoped that the audio recording would come through okay.
Yeah, it sounded great.
Awesome.
Listening back and stuff was fun. And, it's especially fun as we try out new things for the podcast and get to do something on site together. So that's always a great, try something, see how it works.
Very cool. I'm glad it worked out.
Well, I'll admit I'm jealous. I did not get an opportunity to go to .next, so I look forward to hearing the podcast and know that I was jealous not to be there.
I don't think the podcast is a reasonable facsimile, but hopefully scratches a tiny part of that itch.
That's right. Yeah. It's an interesting event. It's completely changed over the years, COVID right in the middle of things. So this year getting back to in person and stuff. How was that, Jirah? How was it to see the customer community again?
I think it's been an interesting time for lots of trade shows, right? Like the big question marks around, do customers even want to attend them anymore? How long should they be? How big should they be? I was delighted to see everybody that did come out to .next, and I know we did certainly smash right through all of our attendance goals that we had set internally. And I have no insider knowledge of what that will do for next year's planning, other than knowing it'll be in Barcelona. So maybe I'll see you guys there. Spoiler, I probably will not see you guys there, but maybe there's always hope. But yeah, it was just so great to see customers that want to come out, hang out with us, hear about what's new from Nutanix, both lately and what's coming. Super high energy show. Great to see everybody there.
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, it's been a mixed bag. Other partners, started by announcing, an in-person event and then pulled back to a virtual event. They're not exactly saying, if it was low turnout, low interest, that kind of thing. So it's fantastic to hear that you smashed through all of your attendance goals. And I heard the turnout was strong. I know we had lots of great conversations and stuff with customers on site, and we sponsored a couple of fun events, happy hour and some other things. So I think it all turned out great from a XenTegra perspective as well.
You guys had a stronger attendance of any partner I know of. So that was super cool. Thank you guys for coming out. It was great to see the whole team out there.
Well, that's important to us. I mean, and I'll just take this second to plug the fact that, education is such an important component from a XenTegra perspective for our customers. And so we want to provide those access to events like that, and plug the event that you're doing. So I know Jirah's been on the road a lot doing follow-ups to Nutanix.next. The X tour is strong and in process. It's visiting this week here in Charlotte, I believe. So can you tell us a little bit about what the X tour is and what you've been doing on the road?
Yeah, man. So we're actually kicking it off tomorrow. Probably too late if you're listening to this, unless we put it up really, really fast tonight. But yeah, tomorrow as we record this, I'll be presenting in. Tomorrow is, hold on, checking my calendar in my head. Tomorrow's Raleigh, and then Thursday this week, that would be the 15th. We'll do it in Charlotte as well, and do an in-person recap for customers around what did we talk about at .next, what does that really mean. And of course, get some time to hang out, share some drinks, do some demos, all that good stuff. So for a lot of the things we announced, we even have some ability to show you what that kind of look and feel will look like of the future products or future offerings, and then talk about what that kind of really means. We'll do it on a different podcast, and we covered some of it on the in-person one from last week, but like, what does it mean that now I can snapshot a cluster and send that data up to public cloud, right? That's like a super, super cool agility offering, but also like means the world for security as well. So what does that impact mean for our customers? I'm excited about it.
Yeah, it's fun looking to the future and seeing what's under wraps. Even if it is a little bit of time out, it's definitely fun. On tap today, we've chosen a topic that we've talked about. I'm pretty sure once or twice, but the topic around database solutions running on Nutanix. We've talked about Era in the past here on the podcast. But you've got a blog post out here talking specifically about NDB and workloads on the Nutanix cloud platform. So why don't we dig into this? The blog post here is introducing the optimized optimized database solution, a new solution to optimizing database total cost of ownership and performance with Nutanix Cloud. The blog date is May the 9th, and it was written by Steve Carter. So
thank you, Steve, for our podcast fodder here today.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a fun one. We've done a couple workshops from a XenTegra perspective with the Nutanix around Era. For someone who's unfamiliar, Jirah, how would you give them the one-line pitch of what Era and NDB is?
So NDB is, let's see, in a line. That's a good one. NDB is your.
Me too, if you have to.
Thank you. Oh, thank you. So generous. Twice to 100% more lines now available for describing NDB. The NDB is how you go from running databases to letting your internal customers, right, your app teams, run their own databases on your platform, and that's no longer your worry at all.
So Ben, you and I were talking before the podcast started. You're having lots of conversations out with customers around automation and stuff. How is this resonating with your customers when you start talking about automation for their database layer?
Well, when you talk to a customer that's managing 2,000 databases and they're in multiple different formats, this tool really becomes helpful to them in a sense of it does give them a one pane of glass. I mean, this is not just working with one set of databases. Like this thing can go across Oracle, SQL, MySQL. And so in most large organizations, there's many different flavors of database engines that are out there. And so our conversation is more of a collapse of administration, as Jirah was saying, don't hold your developers by having them make requests for databases. Give them that ability to clone, backup, snapshot, all those things. That's really what this product does in the conversations we're having with most of our enterprise customers.
Well, also, let's just zoom out a little bit because there's a whole bunch of dimensions to think about when it comes to like databases and do I want those on HCI and what does that do for me? This topic today, NDB covers operational considerations in a lot of ways, like what are the buttons, what are the workflows of how databases come into being on Nutanix. This one actually is focusing more on, because we've done NDB, right, to your point, Phil. We've done a couple episodes on that, and they're still out there and still applicable. This one's focusing more on economics and performance, right? So like if I put my databases on HCI, what does that do for me from a licensing standpoint? Is that really going to run fast enough? Because guess what? My databases are super important to me, and getting easier management and more automation from NDB, but then running slower is a non-starter. So how do we solve for that as well?
Yeah, and so that's a great and interesting dimension to this conversation, especially when you're talking about database software. The licensing implications on your hardware oftentimes dictate a lot more restriction to you as a customer than what you're going to find on the underlying hardware or hypervisor. So, in this blog post, we are talking about the ability to extend compute-only nodes on both ESX and AHV, and while you're still also expanding, or while you also expand storage only, so that you have that flexibility to grow where you need to grow. So, what's the new thing here as part of the AOS 662 release, Jirah?
Yeah, no, great. And to understand the problem set that we're moving into, right? So like to your point, Phil, with like the very I'll say tight-fisted licensing for databases, right? Like databases are where like you and I walk into a customer environment and we find stuff like really, you have 8 cores worth of CPU licensing and that's it, right? And in the old ways, right, where I just had like maybe a physical blade or maybe 2 blades doing that attached to a SAN, it worked okay-ish, right? But in HCI as a scale-out platform, I actually was just teaching a class before this. The smallest CPU that Intel makes is either 24 cores if you want to be able to run one CPU in a box, or for the dual CPU models, it's 8, which gives you 16. So you know, almost like that as the bottom end of the server scale, you know, marches up and up and up as CPUs get kind of wider and wider on a core count every year. That gets really interesting for us as a scale out architecture, right, for HCI. How do we deal with these super constrained workloads with super tiny core counts? You hit on part of our history lesson here, which is like, of course, we initially launched storage only, to where if you had like, let's say, a 4-node cluster but needed more storage than can fit in those 4 nodes, then hey, great, add nodes 5 and node 6 that could run a different hypervisor, right? Maybe you ran vSphere for your compute primarily, or for the HCI 4 initially, then add 2 more nodes that ran AHV. There's no way a VM can live migrate from ESXi over to AHV. Just can't happen, right? Laws of physics and so forth still apply. You can't live migrate between hypervisors. So with that inability to do that, therefore, it would be our thesis that the AHV nodes should be out of scope from like a database licensing perspective. So we've had that for a while. You know, not to go super deep on the architecture, but Nutanix nodes run a controller VM, right? A CVM on every node in the cluster. That controller VM is where all of the storage code happens. All of the storage handling happens in our platform, right? So that's where all the VM IO comes in, and then we do our thing and it translates back into like physical disk IO on all the nodes in the cluster, right? So that's how we take all these unconnected, various disparate storage pools inside of every server, which we call a node, make them into an actual aggregated pool of storage that runs across all of the nodes. We do that all in our CVMs. For these customers that have these super constrained licensing environments where they don't have a lot of database licensing to give to an environment, if they're looking at it and say, I want to license, you know, 8 cores, 16 cores of CPU for my database environment, I don't want any of those cores running your Nutanix CVM, right? That's a Nutanix problem. That's not my problem, right? Go run that somewhere else. That's what this is really solving for, is saying when I want these cores to only run CPU for my databases and not spend any time running CVMs, that's where the compute only node really comes into play, to show this, maybe these 2 nodes over here just run compute, kind of in that same way the old school like blades would just run physical databases, talking to storage that runs elsewhere on those now storage only nodes. So that's really the new, like what's new now is we had compute only that would attach to HCI, or we had storage only that would expand HCI. But either way, half of that equation was still an HCI node to us, meaning running compute and running storage. Now we can do compute only plus storage only itself. So you get that purity of licensing to say the licenses I give to CPU cores are only running my workload and none of them are running those CVMs.
And I can see that being a huge benefit to customers. I mean, you're paying a premium for some of these, you know, enterprise level licenses to Microsoft or Oracle.
Yep.
So you want to get the most power you can without any overhead. So, you know, being a traditional VMware person, that's always been some level of complaint about virtualizing databases. You've got to contend with, you know, the overhead of the hypervisor. So, Ben, as you think through this, I mean, where do you see this fitting with your customers?
So, Jirah, I would want to ask a question, and this is more from the environment that I came from, and I do have some customers ask me about this. When we talk to them about, you know, putting their databases on Nutanix, a lot of them go, I don't really want to blend my workload with those clusters. And what I'm kind of hearing you say is that not only can we give them a licensing advantage, but we can also kind of we can still segregate these workloads inside of the cluster. Am I kind of hearing that correctly, where I could go to my customers and go, hey, you can have a single cluster, but we could use these node types and be able to run those nodes just with the database load, with the licensing you need dedicated to this environment?
Yeah, I mean, every customer's design could vary a little bit. I think in general, right, with let's just say the reality of the world, the average cost of the database licensing and the fact that typically those guys would command maybe their own blade chassis, their own storage array, like there's usually an economic advantage to say, this is my stuff, right? This is my compute, this is my storage resource. There's probably very little, let's say, economic or TCO pressure to say, let's combine back-end database storage with like you're saying, server general purpose storage. Because it's kind of a rounding error cost-wise to say, look, you get your own segmented, siloed off, no one can be a noisy neighbor database storage to do that, right? Though, not saying you can't, the code probably would perfectly allow it, but most database owners would look at that and say, no, that's my stuff. Get your stuff off of it, right? This is only for my tier 0, tier 1. I run the business databases. You go get your own cluster for server. Phil, you're muted there.
No, that's interesting because what we're really, customers are still wanting to have these segmented workloads, but they're also looking at how to gain advantage of cost because like looking at Oracle, some of those clusters can get very expensive very quick, and some a lot of customers are going, I don't really want to tie this investment to just this workload.
Right. Well, to play in the space or expand the thought experiment a little bit more, in general, right, we wouldn't walk into almost any customer, above a certain threshold and say one Nutanix cluster solves all your ailments, period, right? Like, but coupled with that, right, is our thesis that, hey, guess what? Running multiple Nutanix clusters does not linearly grow your management footprint, right? If you had a VDI cluster, right, running your Citrix workloads, those things fundamentally just want different CPUs than your databases want, and then your server wants, right? EUC wants the widest CPU cores it probably can get its hands on with reasonable clock speed, but nothing crazy. Databases want the fewest CPU cores. They want high clock speeds, partly to offset the fewer cores. Servers right in the middle, right? So like it's not unreasonable to see, like, at least for most customers, 3 different Nutanix environments in their estate, whether that's cloud or colo or on-prem. But that's not 3 times as hard to manage as having a single AOS cluster, right? So we don't spend too much time and effort thinking about how do we consolidate down to one cluster, because that's usually not worth the squeeze.
Well, and that's a great point too. You do bring those benefits to that multi-cluster environment. You've got centralized management. You get the same UI, the same management tools, the same automation tools across all of those different clusters. So you're still simplifying, even if you do end up with the net of multiple clusters in the environment for different use cases.
Sure. Or even spread them around, right? Like I could see my Citrix might run, on Nutanix in Azure, right? My hyperf tier 0 database might run in a colo because I want the best power and the best network connectivity. Serververt or DevTest might run on-prem because I want a lower cost of ownership and I want to rent nothing there. But if it's DevTest and maybe my facility loses power, everybody lives, right? So I can have different risk tolerances and profiles there for different workloads. So now I can spread across multiple clusters and multiple locations. That all is still my cloud, right? That my cloud, it goes anywhere that I want it to go, including into public cloud. Yeah, but then like we opened with, right? In this picture of Nutanix nodes purpose-built in a, let's say, single purpose cluster for databases, right? With now this new technology of compute only plus storage only nodes in one cluster, NDB stays in that picture 100%, right?
Yes.
Like NDB is still my operational tailwind, or the wind in my sails, saying now it's easy. It's still easy for my customers, right? My app teams, my developers to deploy and consume and self-service their database needs on this cluster, right? So it's still their pane of glass, it's still the storefront. But what they're deploying onto could be GenPop serververt clusters, could be these purified database only clusters with this new architecture. Doesn't matter to me, right? It's the same experience for them. So NDB is still part of this picture.
Yeah, and I think this is, from my perspective, this is part of growing up the solution to hit the higher end, most performance sensitive sort of workloads. You're taking away any barriers to getting the most out of the hardware at the end of the day.
Yeah, 100%. And then I did tease a little bit, right, around This is somewhat around like licensing TCO. We have NDB for that simplicity. But the third one I mentioned, right, of course, is performance. It has to be worth it to put my tier 0 workloads onto Nutanix to run. And we've got that in spades as well. So with this, remember, it was always a core tenet of Nutanix that the more nodes you have in the cluster, the faster it runs. That hasn't gone away, of course. But that was always painful when I had to license every node for database workloads. Now, if I needed, like, say, 2 nodes limited to running the compute side for databases for licensing reasons, but I want 4 nodes, 6 nodes, 8 nodes worth of storage IO, right? Literally getting millions of IOPS, multiple gigabytes per second of throughput, that's now easily obtainable. And it doesn't bloat my database licensing cost whatsoever to do that. So it actually does give me the performance and the economics that I want to out of that solution.
It's funny from a customer perspective, we made sacrifices around our hardware configurations that were not optimal necessarily to fit into a licensing model. And so you do end up with those weird little clusters with, 8 vCPU or 8 core, processors and things like that, just to meet compliance and to manage your overall costs from the software layer. So
everyone knows it's not the best. It's just what you can afford.
Exactly. And so this is a great solution to kind of bridge that gap. You're talking a little bit about the management layer with NDB. We heard some announcements from .next, and it's not here in this blog article, but if you go out to the Nutanix website, you can see a little bit more about something called Project Beacon. Jirah, can you share a little bit about what's there? And it's the very early phases,
Sure.
A big, huge asterisk to this conversation.
Totally, yeah. Asterisk, double asterisk, dagger, double dagger. I can't do better than what Rajiv described it around. It's like, let's say it's probably be a 3-year journey for us, right? Around the effort here for Project Beacon that will have lots and lots of components still to come. But in general, the vision for Project Beacon, right, is a PaaS platform, right? So it's a platform as a service for you to develop and publish applications to run the business onto that makes it easier to use this hybrid multi-cloud, right? The first capability to come out of this PaaS platform is database migrations, right? So we have had this move tool, and if you go way, way back with us, we even used to have like Extract as a tool for doing VM migrations, and there was an Extract for DB flavor of that just did database migrations. And a lot of that did roll up into what we know and love now as NDB. This one actually, the first component that we're offering now out of Project Beacon actually does cross-cloud database migrations. So we demoed on stage moving a database, say, from native Azure over to AWS or vice versa, right? Because of course it can go both directions. To say, if I have an acquisition or I have an application team that deployed in one cloud, then I want to move that to another cloud later on, that to me can be a couple of clicks, right? And then I hit go and it replicates my data, and that database moves over from cloud to cloud so that now that deployment decision is part of my deployment cycle, but it's not binding, right? And I can change when my environment needs to. So yeah, fundamentally, right, portability and migration is it's just key to who we are nowadays, right? Like, it's something that we need to help our customers do better, faster, more easily. And I personally think it's never going to go away, right? Like, migrations are going to be the order of the day for the next decade plus, right? I saw a stat that 85% of new deployments within 12 months are considered to be in the wrong availability zone, right? They either need to move from cloud to colo to on-prem to cloud, whatever. Like, we're all smart people, and despite thinking our best thoughts and thinking long and hard about where should we deploy this application, 9 times out of 10 within a year, we consider it to have been the wrong decision, and we want to go move it. So that's fine. If we're going to keep on staying in that world, how do we help our customers make those migrations easier and easier for them, right? So, so I think I'm very excited about it. I'm excited about what's yet to come with Project Beacon, but in this first pillar that we're seeing, it's cloud to cloud database migrations, which I think is super cool.
So yeah, I mean, just think about this from a customer perspective, from a management and also a labor perspective, in a sense of, from a management perspective, you pretty much can look at the organization and go, where do you want to be and when do you want to be there? and then I'm sure cost is going to come in this at some point where you're going to look at, evaluating what cloud or what limb of my cloud am I going to be running workloads on. From a manager of technology people, being able to go to the staff and go learn this one UI and have that work across all these multiple clouds. I mean, it just doesn't get any simpler than that in my mind. And you're just really setting the organization up for the future, wherever they decide to land, for whatever reason they decide to land on. Sometimes companies don't make decisions just solely based on economics.
Yeah.
So again, future-proofing the organization is really a huge step with this, in my opinion.
I think you're right, but I hadn't thought about that. But the people side of that is where it gets really, really interesting, because to pull off that task, right? Move database from cloud A to cloud B, whatever the clouds are, I don't care. Like, that's fundamentally a team. Realistically could be one person. So now I have a bus factor or a lottery factor of one, right? I'm single point of failure on that one human being that can learn the skill set to maintain 3 skill sets, right? The cloud A skill set, cloud B skill set, and the database skill set all in one human being. Like, that lends itself much more readily to, that's a tool, not a training kind of outcome, right? Like, the team should learn automation, the team should learn their domain expertise, right? Be the database expert. But to have 3 different expertises in one human being or in one team of individuals is a pretty tall order. So, like, to me, that just screams tooling problem, not training problem.
Well, and then also we haven't even talked about compliance and risk factors in this, man.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. So that's a whole nother can of worms we can go into there when it comes to something like this, or justifying something like this. Yeah. Now, for me also, I think Project Beacon, I know this is really early and I, again, was not out at .next to catch the announcement, but it sounds like they were getting these things to add services as services, so that our customers don't have to invest in heavy infrastructure to be able to use all these tools that they have. Before, it would be, we would have to, if you wanted to do NDB, what was R, you would have to have an infrastructure to lay that on to be able to get that to work. And so I'm excited to be able to go that this is now a service where you really don't have to own the infrastructure to run this. We're providing you as a service infrastructure tools and all on the back end. And that's exciting to me. So again, just simplifying the environment and faster deployment for our customers.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. We'll have even more fun stuff to talk about there in the future.
Yeah. Now, this is a modern approach, right? I mean, this is not just a traditional kind of automation tool. This is a rethink of where and how you're deploying the infrastructure, right? It's all written in containers or on Kubernetes, right? Did I understand that?
Yeah, my understanding as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So, that's exciting, I think, because it opens up a lot of new capabilities, but it's also being architected from the start for that modern, our next generation of scale, our next generation of style of creating applications and doing things. So this is going to be a fun one to talk about in the future for sure. Guys, I think that's a great place for us to wrap for today, though, too. What would you say is your parting thought about where you're going from a database perspective and this new announcement for compute only and storage only nodes? How would you want to wrap it up?
I think it's super exciting. I think it's super encouraging how we're manifesting this vision of, like, for most customers, dare I say almost everyone, the reality is going to be multi-cloud. But we also now know, of course, the reality is not just VMs, right? So it's like, what really runs the business? How do we help make that an easy solution for, whether it's, like you said, containers, whether it's databases, whether it's storage, whether it's VMs, all of those things we're not done until our customers can easily say all of those things can go anywhere and I can make the right choices for my environment and for my business.
Yeah, for sure. Ben, what's your key takeaway from today?
Man, I've learned a lot today, just with the NDB and the other things. I always love joining the podcast. I probably get out of it more than I put into. So I thank you guys for allowing me to tag along. I think for me, a good parting thought on this is just flexibility and simplicity, man. That's really what I see Nutanix bringing to the table. So as I learn about the product, from, being a former customer, and as I go talk to customers and hear about what they really need day to day, Nutanix really is looking at simplifying and making, the platform is just, man, simplistic and flexible as it can get. So with the addition of storage nodes and compute nodes, it just goes into that story, man. So that's really my final thoughts. Philip, I appreciate you having me today, friend.
Yeah, Ben, thank you so much for carving out the time and joining us. Jirah, we appreciate all of the information that you're spreading, helping everybody get to know a little more what's going on in Nutanix. So it's always great to have you here, and we thank you for making the time.
Always a pleasure, man. Thanks for having me.
Well, until next time, this was Nutanix Weekly from XenTegra, and we'll see you on the flip side.